The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. Got a great guest, golf buddy, friend, racial equity coach, Devon Alexander. Devon, thank you so much for being here, man.
Pete, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
All right, Devon, let's jump in and tell the listeners who you are. Let's say who you are and what you do.
I'm a Northwest, suburban land, Chicago area, Black African-American, male, educator, facilitator, coach, leader.
You always have a lot, and a golfer. Let's go there too, right?
Let's throw the golf in there.
Obviously. So let's go into your educational path, right? So Palatine area, right? Is that where we grew up? And for those who don't know, it's northwest suburb of Chicago. Tell us a little bit about your path in education.
I say it all the time that an individual's life experience before they show up in the world is, coming into the middle of whatever their parents' circumstances are. And so I would say that my educational experience is a direct result of my parents being born in the 50s, 60s, coming through the aftermath of the civil rights era and that racism that generation went through. I was living through the most immediate legacy of that. And so educationally, I grew up in low-income apartment housing, roach-infested, urine-stained hallways, gang life, just really chaotic, toxic living environments. And the way Chicagoland breaks out in terms of its segregation, most of the people living in those spaces were people of color on the outskirts of the single family home, predominantly white parts of the town. And so all the schools would be on that side of town, on the white side of town. And that experience as a kid was real palpable, real tangible. We knew that we were crossing lines, going over to their town, their side of town. Everything's over there. And so having those kinds of living conditions on the side of town where people of color were living, school wasn't a priority. School wasn't about learning and development. School was about escape from those dysfunctional components of those communities of color, the legacy that we lived through of American racism. We got over into school, it was about freedom, liberation to some extent. And so as a student, while I was talented, capable academically, my focus was on my friends, athletics, the social aspects of school and girls. And it stayed that way for, much of my early elementary, middle school, and half of high school. And I didn't really turn it on. I didn't really utilize my academic gifts until second semester, sophomore year. So what I knew as a kid growing up, parent-teacher conferences, teachers would always tell my mother he has the potential, he just isn't applying it. I heard that message from as early as I can remember parent-teacher conferences. And I knew that to be the case throughout elementary school and into high school. And, I made the decision post-junior high school to go away to attend Culver Military Academy, Culver Academies. It's a boarding prep school for the boys. It's a military structure. And then there's a girls' school also on campus, and theirs is a leadership structure. Best decision I ever made in my life. One of the best decisions I made in my early life. So 14 to 18 years old. It put me in a situation where I was out of the immediate dysfunction that resulted from racism in my parents' life. And I was in an environment where I was faced with choices for myself as an individual, as a young teen, as a growing teenager, as a student. And the military system it suited me well. It positioned me with a pathway to achievement. I wanted to be one of the top military cadets in the school, and to do that, all I had to do was make that choice. And in my sophomore year, that choice to succeed in the military system, in contrast to my lack of focus on academics, well, they collided. And my lack of academic focus, though, I could crap out a B with little to no effort, because I wasn't focused, because I wasn't trying to achieve at higher levels academically, that threatens to keep me from being able to advance militarily. And I wasn't willing to accept that. And so I had to make a change academically. And it was at that point that all of those conversations in parent-teacher conferences where teachers claimed that I had potential to be really gifted academically, I realized I didn't get anything below a 3.0 after that point for the second half of my high school career. That success militarily, academically, led me to Wabash College down in Crawfordsville, Indiana, an all-male, small liberal arts college. And at the time, that's what I needed. I just had 2.5 years of really pursuing my best academically, but 2.5 years isn't enough time over a lifetime of education to really solidify that academic ability. And so that small school environment, I had some really good friends from Culver who attended there. It was in Indiana. I was comfortable with Indiana in spite of the racism that exists there. I knew how to navigate that space. I would be doing it with two of my best friends from high school. And I really started focusing on, I can see I am academically gifted. What'll happen when that is my sole focus? When I really focus in on developing that academic gift to its fullest, in relationship to whatever my purpose, my calling is in terms of a career. And so over that time, I really started moving down that path of race and sociology, coupled with faith-based organizations and American life, so faith and American society, and also studying English as a potential career as an English teacher.
For your journey, then you actually took it upon yourself to become a racial equity coach, to really start to dig into what I'm guessing you're just saying, like, trying to figure out those navigation areas and to help others. And you've made this your life work. Can you tell us a little bit about going into becoming that transition? So you teach English at high school, and you also are, I'm going to go ahead and say United States renowned, because right now, you're very well known in the racial equity coaching areas. Tell us a little bit about that. So how did that come of that? You've taught me a lot, is what I'm trying to say here, and that's amazing. And there's so far to go. So tell us about that transition then from college into where you are right now, and a little bit about what you're doing.
One, thanks for the affirmation, bro.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. Just as friends, as a interracial friendship, acknowledging that impact we have on each other in our work, for sure. We growing together. Race and education have always been linked for me, given that experience of crossing those racial lines and it being directly tied to school and our interracial experience in school settings. And so I've always felt that schools were places that replicated the racism that diminishes the life potential, the life experiences of all of us within them. And so I always knew that going into teaching, I was going to focus in on that path, as well as the academic development of students. This line from our code of conduct: my aim in life is to become the best person I can be. To this end, I will strive always to develop my potential to its fullest, physically, morally, intellectually, spiritually. And that academic development and that life development have always been key for me as a teacher. And so coming into back to the Chicagoland area, back to that racialized space of school settings, upon attaining my first teaching position in a school that's touted for its racial diversity, its valuing of the racial experience, its claim to be ahead of the curve in terms of race and schooling. I just found that those narratives, those mythologies weren't real on the ground. And so from professional development to teacher-student experience to curriculum to leadership and race, the system was just out of whack, man. It replicated that regular dysfunction. And so for me, having studied it my whole life, once I got into that situation, I just put my nose to the ground. I hit the stacks, hit the books, and I studied the intersection of race and education. I picked up everything I could read relative to just the field of study. And then I began studying the art of facilitation and professional development in school settings. And, 15 years later, I'm a national racial equity consultant coach.
What are some of the things we know, as a white male, I'm understanding and learning constantly about things that I've never been exposed to, not only on the golf course with you, but honestly, I've been through a couple of your professional developments when we worked together at the same school. What are some of the highlights over those 15 years that you've moved the bar a little bit or changed something that you've seen? And then obviously we can go into the other things what are like maybe one or two things you would like to see changed in your lifetime? As we know, this whole system works very slowly. You've seen some good things happen, yet we still have this amount of work to do.
I'm going to liken it to content, process, and product. So in terms of content, over the years, I've really found that it's just not, in terms of our education preparation, it's not content that we're learning. And so there's so much out there written about race and education, race and society. You'd never run out of resource material for that study and that preparation. And so for me, 4 key theories really stand out as central to shifting individual educators. Whiteness is Property, Cheryl Harris, just really lays out social construction of white superiority in the country and how the concept of whiteness continues to shape and structure society and our lives. Joyce E. King's Disconsciousness and Disconscious Racism, Ideology, Identity, and the Miseducation of Teachers, published in the late 80s, early 90s. She really reveals how American racial socialization lives in us and shows up in us as educators. Robert DiAngelo's piece, My Class Didn't Trump My Race, Using Privilege to Face Oppression. She lays out this concept of common patterns of internalized white racial dominance. Those common patterns I experienced directly in my early teaching career in that site. Now going around nationally as a racial equity coach and consultant, I see them play out across the country and across the world. And then the last one is Ricky Lee Allen's White Dialogic Domination, which essentially says that, when you're in that predominantly white space, like American society, like the educational institutional system, the white racial perspective, the white racial narrative dominates to the detriment, to the oppression and suppression of other racialized expressions. So that's the content piece that is really beneficial and shifting. I call those the 4 foundational articles. In terms of process, lately I've been likening the work to the kinds of processes that other professionals go through and the time that's required for individuals to move from a novice to a really effective, masterful individual in their craft. And so I like a process that is progressive in terms of development. It takes years for educators to overcome the years of socialization that they've had around race. Now you're in the profession, not only are you trying to learn your craft, but you're also having to unlearn the ways in which we've been detrimentally impacted by race in our society. And so really extending a progressive development process for educators, I found that to be really effective. It gives them the space, the grace, and the compassion to grow as long as they are serious and conscientious about getting better for the sake of, one, the children whose lives are there to be developed in those academic settings, and two, themselves and the other adults there. And then the last one is product. So where I've seen it shift is a professional development program that is comprehensive, that is practical, and that's accessible for educators to work their way through it over time. Those three components, man, I've seen shifts happen.
You know, in education, and we've been there. We've been through PDs. We've been through all these different things that are one and dones, or, okay, we're going to do this for this year and then it's out. One of the things you've really taught me is this is something that is deeper than that. This is the unlearning part, and then the relearning or new learning part to this process is a lengthy piece. It's not something that we can just say, okay, well, all right, fall of 2021, we're going to do this, and then, yeah, we're going to check that off the box. It just doesn't work that way, and you've really helped me realize that. And I really like that about, you know, our conversations and when you work with schools. Tell us a little bit about, like, when you work with, so you have clients and things like that. So tell us about what does that path look like? Is it, you specialize in not just checking the box, man. It's really, you, like you just said, going deep into things and really, you know, this is, man, I don't know how to say it. It's not a short-term thing. This is something that is something that a school has to be all in, and it can't surface level. We see a lot of surface level things. I mean, I've experienced it. You've experienced it. What kind of things do you do differently to where you kind of, you create that kind of culture of learning culture? I don't know. That's just me saying that, but yeah.
Man, for real, I treat it like re-education. So we're just going back to school. You know, we spent 2 years in a teacher prep program, but we spent 4, 6, 8 in undergrad and grad school. Mm-hmm. And then once we got in the profession, we had that probationary period of typically 4 years. And so if really, generally a 12-year process is the process for individuals to become proficient in a craft, mm-hmm. in a field of study, then why do we treat professional development any different? You know, we need to give it that same space, and then we need to treat it with that same critical focus in terms of, this is learning. Teaching and learning that have to take place, even for us educators. We got to treat ourselves like students again and go through that process so that we can unlearn the ways in which race shows up in us and obstructs the academic and life development of kids. And so that's the biggest, man. Just treating it like a re-education process, literally, from year 1 to year, whatever it takes for you to get proficient, effective, and master. Additionally, in the spaces of school settings, man, what I found is that you don't need to look at it like you got to move whole systems at the outset. You need to build cohorts, cadres. You need to build up that critical mass of individuals who, when the system of race and education opposes those kinds of systemic transformations, opposes those kinds of individual agents who are working to improve the system on race, you got a critical mass of individuals who have the capacity to withstand it, who won't allow themselves to emotionally check out because of the nature of the challenge, that they will persevere and they'll continue that process of learning in order to find new and innovative ways to counter and overcome those systems that want to oppose racial equity in school settings, man. Those are my 2 big ones.
How do people find you, man? I'm going to guess after a lot of people hear this and start, I mean, you already have, like I said, your clients are building, you're getting to capacity. So how do people find Devon Alexander?
We have some things in the works. At this time, I'm working to build my personal brand. In the interim, the easiest way to get at me is Devon at paracletepartnerships.com. So that's PARACLETE partnerships.com. I'm always happy to talk to individuals out there, specifically in education, but then in other fields, who just want to engage in serious and authentic conversation about the intersections of race and what they do. And then to build that kind of community and collaboration is what I'm all about. So I'm here, eager to talk.
Devon, thank you so much. For just honestly, as a white male, I've learned so much from you in the education system. Kind of a little bit of a reason why Disrupt Education evolved, so I appreciate you for that. But thank you so much for talking to our podcast listeners. I appreciate you, and thanks so much for being a disruptor of education in a great way, man.
Thanks, P, man. Appreciate the opportunity, brother.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, we'll see you on Disrupt Education.